Laughter rolled across the hangar deck before the human shuttle had even finished cycling through the airlock. Lieutenant Elias Rowan stepped onto polished alloy flooring beneath towering banners of the Galactic Coalition. Around him stood warriors from a dozen worlds, each unmistakably built for battle. Broad-shouldered reptilian marines rested heavy rifles against armored scales. Four-armed infantry from a high-gravity world watched with amused curiosity. Tall officers with luminous eyes spoke quietly among themselves, making no effort to hide their smiles. One of them chuckled. "That is the human officer?" Another tilted her head. "He is smaller than the reports suggested." A deeper voice answered. "I thought they would at least have claws." Elias heard every word. He kept his expression calm, adjusted the collar of his dark coalition uniform, and continued walking as though the comments belonged to someone else. Years in Earth's military had taught him that confidence often looked exactly like silence. The cruiser, Resolute Dawn, stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its interior alive with disciplined motion. Engineers disappeared beneath glowing maintenance panels, while flight crews guided sleek interceptors into launch racks. It was among the Coalition's finest warships. And today, it had become humanity's first frontline assignment. At the far end of the hangar, an honor guard parted. Captain Soraya Valor descended the command platform with measured steps. She stood almost a full head taller than anyone nearby, her sapphire skin catching reflections from the overhead lights. Silver markings traced elegant paths along her forearms before disappearing beneath her uniform sleeves. Her midnight black braid rested across one shoulder, and golden eyes studied Elias with cool precision. No smile greeted him. Lieutenant Elias Rowan. Her voice carried effortlessly through the hangar. "You are punctual." "Yes, Captain." She circled him once without haste, assessing posture, equipment, and bearing. "I reviewed your file." "I expected as much. You have an impressive record by human standards." A few officers nearby exchanged amused glances. Soraya folded her hands behind her back. "Unfortunately, we are not measuring by human standards." The laughter returned, softer than before. Elias met her gaze. "I wouldn't ask you to." For the first time, something flickered behind her composed expression, not approval, interest. It vanished almost immediately. "Our mission requires discipline, Lieutenant." "I agree. I also require honesty." "You'll have it." She nodded once. "Then answer honestly." A brief silence settled across the hangar. "Do you believe humanity belongs in the Coalition military?" Every nearby conversation stopped. Elias considered the question instead of rushing toward an answer. "I believe battle decides that better than politics." The corner of Soraya's mouth moved almost imperceptibly. "Convenient." "No." He held her eyes steadily. "Practical." Another officer stepped forward, his armored tail tapping against the deck. "Captain," he said, with respect, "perhaps the human would serve more effectively among engineering divisions." A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd. Someone added, "They're adaptable." Another laughed. "Every fleet needs mechanics." Elias remained still. Soraya looked toward the gathering. "Enough." Silence returned instantly. "Whether you approve of coalition policy is irrelevant." She turned back to Elias. "You are assigned to my command. I won't waste the opportunity. I expect you not to." Without another word, she pivoted toward the lift leading to the bridge. "Report in 10 minutes." The bridge overlooked an endless field of stars. Transparent tactical displays floated above polished command stations, while officers monitored patrol routes along the coalition frontier. Elias quietly took his assigned position beside the executive officer. He observed before speaking. Habit. Every crew had rhythms, every commander had patterns. Soraya favored concise orders. The executive officer anticipated them before they were spoken. Navigation adjusted course without confirmation. Efficient. Comfortably predictable. Then, every display turned crimson. An alarm echoed throughout the ship. Unknown contacts. A sensor officer looked up sharply. They're emerging inside minimum detection range. How many? Soraya asked. The officer hesitated. I can't calculate. The stars themselves seemed to tear open. Dark vessels poured through expanding fractures in space. Their silhouettes jagged and asymmetrical, unlike any coalition design. Within seconds, the tactical display filled with hostile markers. The bridge fell silent. One whisper escaped anyway. That's impossible. Soraya's voice cut through the shock. Raise shields. Already attempting. Signal nearby fleets. No response. Communications disrupted. The first enemy volley struck. The Resolute Dawn shuddered violently. Lights flickered. Another impact followed immediately. Console screens exploded into showers of sparks. Forward batteries offline. Shield integrity dropping. 38%. Soraya stepped toward the central display. Maintain formation. The executive officer frowned. Captain. Another explosion rocked the cruiser. The fleet icons surrounding them disappeared one after another. Destroyed. Not retreating. Destroyed. Elias watched the tactical projection. The enemy ignored conventional engagement lines. They attacked logistics, communications, sensor relays, command coordination, not the warships themselves. His heartbeat slowed. Patterns emerged. They're dismantling decision-making. Nobody answered. They don't want stronger ships. Still, nobody answered. They want isolated ones. Soraya looked at him. What did you say? They're attacking our command structure. Another cruiser vanished from the display. Elias pointed toward the projection. Look. Several officers followed his hand. Their fleet isn't advancing evenly. He highlighted scattered enemy movements. They're creating overlapping kill zones. The executive officer stared. He's right. Soraya's eyes narrowed. Recommendations? Every officer on the bridge looked toward Elias. He spoke without hesitation. Break formation. Several commanders reacted immediately. What? Coalition doctrine forbids. It also assumes functioning communications, Elias replied. They've already taken those away. Another violent impact threw half the bridge sideways. Warning sirens screamed. We stay together, Elias continued. They'll keep cutting us apart, one command ship at a time. Soraya studied the tactical display. Every instinct she possessed argued against abandoning centuries of military doctrine. Every casualty report argued otherwise. She drew one steady breath. Helm. Captain. Break formation. Shock spread across the bridge. Execute independent maneuver patterns. The helmsman hesitated only a fraction before obeying. The Resolute Dawn veered sharply away from the collapsing coalition line. Enemy targeting shifted. Not perfectly. Just enough. For the first time since the attack began, hostile fire lost synchronization. The executive officer looked between the tactical display and Elias. Their firing solution broke. Elias was already studying the next movement. It'll only last seconds. Soraya turned toward every station. Prepare counterattack. No one laughed anymore. Not on the bridge. Not anywhere aboard the Resolute Dawn. The Resolute Dawn rolled hard to port as enemy fire carved through the space where the cruiser had been only a heartbeat earlier. Officers grabbed their stations to keep from being thrown across the bridge. The tactical display changed faster than anyone could comfortably follow. Instead of neat formations, coalition ships scattered into independent vectors. It looked chaotic. Elias saw opportunity. "Navigation," he said. "Keep changing acceleration profiles every 12 seconds." The helmsman glanced toward Captain Soraya. She gave a single nod. "Do it." The cruiser lurched again, engines roaring beneath the deck. A barrage of incandescent plasma swept past their stern, missing by less than 50 meters. "The enemy overshot us," the sensor officer reported. "They're predicting our movement," Elias replied, "so stop being predictable." Several bridge officers exchanged uncertain looks. No coalition doctrine taught this. Every battle manual emphasized disciplined formations and synchronized fleet maneuvers. Human doctrine had been born on worlds where communications failed, commanders died, and plans collapsed. Adapt, survive, keep moving. Another alarm sounded. Boarding signatures. The words cut through the bridge. Enemy breaching pods slammed into the cruiser's hull with deafening impacts. Explosive bolts fired. Steel groaned. "They're inside Deck 7. Deck 9. Engineering access." Soraya was already moving. "Marine detachments, intercept immediately." She reached for her sidearm before looking toward Elias. "You've trained for boarding actions?" He checked the magazine on his compact rifle. "More than I hoped." "Then you're with me." The lift doors opened into smoke. Emergency lights painted the corridor in deep crimson. Sparks showered from ruptured conduits overhead. A coalition marine crouched behind an overturned cargo loader, firing controlled bursts toward an intersection. "They keep coming." The enemy finally came into view. They were unlike any coalition species Elias had studied. Dark segmented armor, covered lean bodies, built for speed rather than strength. Their helmets had no visible eyes. Only narrow bands of shifting white light. One darted across the corridor with startling speed. A Marine fired too late. The creature tackled him into a bulkhead. Elias raised his rifle. 3 shots. Center mass. The enemy collapsed. Another appeared immediately. Then another. "They're traveling in pairs," Elias shouted. "No." He watched a third emerge from a maintenance hatch. "Groups of 3. Soraya reacted instantly. "Crossfire teams." Coalition Marines shifted positions. Instead of focusing on single targets, overlapping fields of fire covered every corridor. The next enemy squad barely entered the intersection before concentrated fire drove them back. The advance stalled. For the first time, the boarding force hesitated. Elias frowned. "They're thinking." Soraya heard him. "So are we." She stepped into the open, her pulse blade ignited with a brilliant blue edge. An enemy warrior lunged. She met it head-on. The clash echoed through the corridor. She pivoted gracefully, redirected the attack, and drove her blade through the opponent's chest. Another came from her blind side. Elias fired before it reached her. The impact spun the attacker sideways. Soraya finished it without breaking stride. She glanced back only briefly. "Thank you. You would have done the same." "I would." Minutes later, engineering reported fresh explosions. "The reactor cooling array is compromised." The bridge relayed another warning. "If they reach the core, we lose the ship." Soraya turned toward her officers. "We hold engineering." Elias shook his head. "No." Every eye found him. "If we keep reacting, they'll choose every battlefield." The executive officer frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Elias crouched beside a holographic maintenance map. He traced several narrow corridors branching behind engineering. These access tunnels. They're maintenance routes. They're also unguarded. One engineer blinked. "Hardly anyone knows they exist." "The enemy probably doesn't." Soraya immediately understood. You want to flank them. I want them wondering how defenders appeared behind them. A faint smile touched her face. A very human solution. The maintenance passages were barely wide enough for armored soldiers. Pipes radiated heat through the cramped spaces. The air smelled faintly of lubricant and scorched metal. Coalition Marines moved carefully behind Elias. No one complained about following the human anymore. At the final junction, he raised one hand. Everyone stopped. Muted weapon fire echoed through the bulkhead ahead. Engineering. He held up 3 fingers. 2. 1. The hatch burst open. Human and coalition soldiers flooded into the compartment from behind. Enemy troops froze in visible surprise. That single moment was enough. Disciplined volleys erupted across the room. Within seconds, the attackers were surrounded. Several attempted to retreat. There was nowhere left to go. Silence slowly replaced gunfire. The engineering chief stared across the room. They actually looked confused. They expected us to defend the obvious entrance, Elias answered. We didn't. The chief laughed, despite himself. I like humans. Hours seemed to pass before the final boarding alarm ended. Damage crews spread throughout the cruiser. Medical teams filled every available compartment. The battle outside still raged, but the Resolute Dawn remained operational, against every expectation. On the bridge, casualty reports continued arriving. Too many coalition ships had fallen. Too many friends would never answer another roll call. Soraya stood before the main viewport, watching distant explosions bloom across the darkness. Elias approached quietly. You saved the ship, she said. We all did. You changed the battle. I delayed losing it. She turned toward him. Her golden eyes no longer carried the detached skepticism from the hangar. Instead, they searched his face as though trying to solve a difficult question. Your academy teaches this. It teaches us that plans fail. And then, we make another one. She looked back toward the stars. Our officers spend decades mastering perfect doctrine. Elias folded his hands behind his back. Humans usually master recovering from imperfect situations. A soft breath escaped her. Perhaps we've underestimated what that means. Before either could continue, the communications officer spoke. Captain. She faced the bridge. We've intercepted enemy transmissions. Can you translate them? Partially. The officer hesitated. There is something unusual. What? They've identified our vessel. Soraya exchanged a glance with Elias. Go on. The officer swallowed. The message doesn't identify us by ship designation. It identifies us as... His voice became almost a whisper. The human command vessel. A quiet unease settled across the bridge. The enemy had crossed half the galaxy. They had attacked without warning. And somehow, they already knew humanity was aboard. The bridge remained silent long after the transmission ended. No one spoke. No one needed to. The words lingered over every officer like a shadow. The human command vessel. Captain Soraya broke the silence first. Replay it. The communications officer obeyed. A distorted voice filled the bridge, harsh and mechanical, translated through coalition software. Target confirmed. Human command vessel. Priority engagement authorized. The recording ended. The executive officer folded his arms. That designation makes no sense. This is a coalition cruiser. It is now the only coalition cruiser with a human officer in command staff, Elias said quietly. Several heads turned toward him. You think they're hunting us because of you? The executive officer asked. I think they're hunting humanity. Soraya studied the tactical display. And they expected us to be important before our first campaign. Her gaze settled on Elias. They know something we don't. 3 days later, the resolute dawn drifted through a debris field left behind by the ambush. Recovery crews searched shattered hulls for survivors, while engineers patched armor plates blackened by plasma fire. The atmosphere aboard the cruiser had changed. The laughter was gone. When Elias crossed the corridors now, officers greeted him with respectful nods. Even the Marine sergeant who had joked about assigning humans to maintenance approached him near engineering. "I owe you an apology." Elias looked up from the maintenance report. "For what? I judged you before seeing you fight." "It happens." The sergeant shook his head. "It shouldn't." He extended a heavy, armored hand. "You earned your place." Elias accepted the handshake. "So did your Marines." The sergeant smiled. "I'll tell them that." Later that evening, Captain Soraya requested Elias's presence in the observation deck. It was one of the quietest places aboard the ship. A transparent dome overlooked the stars, interrupted only by drifting fragments of destroyed vessels. She stood alone near the glass, hands clasped behind her back. Without her command armor, she appeared less imposing. Still graceful, still disciplined, just more approachable. "You wanted to see me, Captain." "I did." She motioned toward the empty seat beside her. "Sit." He hesitated for only a moment before doing so. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. After several moments, Soraya asked, "Do humans always remain so calm?" "No. You did." "I was afraid." She turned toward him. "You never showed it. We're taught that fear isn't the problem. What is? What fear makes you do?" She considered that answer. "My people teach children to master instinct. My instructors taught us instinct gets people killed." A faint smile appeared. "Our academies would argue endlessly." "They probably still will." That earned a quiet laugh. It surprised both of them. "I have a question," Soraya said. "Go ahead." During the boarding action, she paused, choosing her words carefully. "When that soldier attacked me, I remember. You fired, despite knowing I stood directly behind him." "I did." "You were certain you wouldn't hit me?" "No." Her eyebrows lifted. "I was confident enough." "You accepted the risk." "I calculated it." "And if your calculation had been wrong?" Elias looked out toward the stars. "I would have carried that mistake for the rest of my life." Her expression softened. "You speak as though every decision has weight." "It does." She watched him for several quiet seconds. Then she realized something. He never described battle as glorious. He described responsibility. It was different from nearly every officer she had known. An alert interrupted the conversation. "Captain to bridge." They rose immediately. By the time they reached the command deck, a holographic map filled the center of the room. The intelligence officer pointed toward a cluster of remote systems. "We've identified the direction the enemy fleet retreated." "Can we pursue?" Soraya asked. "Not immediately." "Why not?" "They abandoned something." The display zoomed inward. A small station drifted between broken asteroids. No power signature. No weapons. No life signs. Elias frowned. "Or they want us to think that." The intelligence officer nodded. "Exactly." Soraya crossed her arms. "Recommendations." Several officers began discussing cautious reconnaissance. Elias remained focused on the station. Finally, he spoke. "They left it behind on purpose." The room quieted. "A trap?" someone asked. "Possibly." He enlarged the image. "Or bait." "For what?" "Our curiosity." Soraya looked toward him. "So we ignore it?" "No." He smiled slightly. "We investigate." Several officers looked confused. but not the way they expect. Hours later, a small shuttle drifted silently toward the abandoned station. Its engines remained cold. Instead of broadcasting approach signals, it floated behind fragments of wreckage, using only brief maneuvering bursts. Inside sat Elias, Soraya, 4 Coalition Marines, and a human combat medic. The docking collar connected without resistance. "No security response," whispered one Marine. "Too quiet," Elias replied. The airlock opened. Darkness greeted them. Emergency lighting flickered weakly across abandoned corridors. Dust floated undisturbed. The station felt empty, until Elias crouched beside the floor. "What is it?" Soraya asked. He pointed. "There, barely visible." A fresh scrape across the metal deck. Heavy equipment, recently moved. The Marines immediately raised their weapons. The station wasn't abandoned. Someone had prepared it. A distant metallic sound echoed through the corridor. Not machinery, footsteps. Soraya lifted one hand. Everyone froze. The sound came again. Closer. Then another. Not one person. Several. Elias motioned toward a side passage. They moved without speaking. The footsteps entered the corridor they had just vacated. Through a narrow maintenance grate, Elias caught sight of 4 enemy soldiers. One of them carried a portable transmitter. The others scanned the hallway cautiously. "They're searching," whispered the medic. "No," Elias murmured. "They're waiting. For us? For confirmation." He watched the transmitter. "They're trying to tell someone we've arrived." Soraya immediately understood. "The fleet." Elias nodded. "They expected us to walk into this." She looked at him. "So, let's disappoint them." For the first time since humanity had entered coalition service, Captain and Lieutenant smiled for exactly the same reason. Elias raised 2 fingers. The Marines behind him shifted without a word, each taking a position that covered a different angle of the narrow maintenance corridor. The enemy patrol continued down the passage, unaware that 6 coalition soldiers watched them through the grated panel. The portable transmitter emitted a faint pulse. "They're sending a beacon," the human medic whispered. "Can you jam it?" Soraya asked. Elias shook his head. Too late. The signal had already gone out. He glanced toward the maintenance map projected on his wrist display. "They've confirmed our presence. That means they'll expect us to move toward the station's data core." The executive Marine frowned. "So we don't." "We do." Several heads turned. "We just won't arrive the way they're predicting." Soraya's golden eyes lingered on him for a moment before she nodded. "Lead the way." The maintenance shafts were barely large enough to crawl through. Warm air flowed around power conduits, while distant vibrations pulsed through the station's aging framework. The Coalition Marines struggled with the confined space. Elias moved through it naturally. "My people would hate this," Soraya admitted quietly behind him. "Humans have a long history of squeezing into places we probably shouldn't." A soft chuckle escaped her before she caught herself. One of the Marines looked back in surprise. He had never heard the captain laugh during an operation. The shaft opened above a circular chamber. Rows of inactive terminals surrounded a central archive core. Only 3 enemy soldiers guarded it. "They expected a frontal assault," Elias said. "They didn't expect the ceiling." Soraya drew her pulse blade. "I'll take the left. I'll cover you." She looked at him once. No words followed. None were needed. Elias dropped first. His boots struck the deck with a heavy clang. Before the guards fully reacted, 2 precise shots disabled the nearest sentry's weapon. Soraya descended immediately afterward, landing with practiced grace. Her blade flashed once. Another guard collapsed. The final defender reached for the alarm. The Coalition Marines burst through the opposite hatch before the warning could sound. Seconds later, the chamber fell silent. The human medic exhaled. Efficient. Elias holstered his sidearm. They'll still know something went wrong. Then let's be quick. The Archive Corps accepted Coalition security overrides after several attempts. Lines of unfamiliar symbols scrolled across the display. The intelligence specialist accompanying them frowned. This isn't tactical data. What is it? Soraya asked. The officer translated as quickly as the software allowed. Historical records. From the enemy? No. He looked increasingly confused. Coalition records. Elias stepped closer. How old? Approximately 300 years. Soraya crossed her arms. Why would Coalition archives be stored on an enemy listening station? The officer continued reading. Then his expression changed completely. Captain. His voice became unusually quiet. I think these files were stolen. The first document appeared above the console. Classified. Founding Council Security Session. Several paragraphs remained encrypted. Only fragments were visible. Human civilization. Unacceptable long-term projection. Adaptive combat learning exceeds predictive models. Delay military integration until further assessment. The room became still. One Marine finally spoke. That can't be right. The intelligence officer opened another file. This one contained battlefield simulations. Dozens of them. Every simulation began with humanity as the Coalition's weakest member. Every simulation ended the same way. Human commanders eventually outperformed every other species. Not because they possessed superior technology. Not because they were physically stronger. Because they learned faster, adapted faster, recovered faster. Soraya stared at the projection. They knew. No one answered. They knew before humanity ever reached the stars. Elias remained silent. She turned toward him. They delayed your admission. It appears so. They called your species dangerous. They called us adaptable. Her eyes narrowed. Those words meant the same thing to them. A warning siren suddenly echoed through the station. The archive lights shifted to crimson. They found us. One Marine reported. Motion indicators flooded the tactical display. Enemy signatures converged from every corridor. Too many. They're sealing every exit, Soraya said. Elias studied the map. They're leaving one. She looked over his shoulder. A single route remained completely unguarded. They want us to run there. Exactly. A kill zone. He nodded. So we make our own exit. The engineering charges carried by the Marines had originally been intended for sabotage. Instead, Elias pointed toward the outer maintenance wall. Can those breach the hull? The Marine blinked. Yes. Good. Soraya understood immediately. You intend to leave through space. It's the route they aren't watching. Minutes later, the charges detonated. The hull ruptured with a thunderous roar. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the station, but not before explosive decompression ripped through the surrounding corridors. Enemy soldiers lost their footing as air howled into the void. Magnetic boots locked Elias and his team firmly to the deck. Move, Soraya ordered. One by one, they crossed into open space, using emergency maneuver packs. Fragments of metal drifted around them against the endless darkness. Their shuttle accelerated from behind a nearby asteroid. Its pilot had anticipated the emergency extraction signal. The rear hatch opened. Everyone reached safety, except Soraya. A fractured support beam, pulled by the violent decompression, slammed into her from behind. Her maneuver pack spun wildly. She tumbled away from the shuttle. Warning lights flashed across her suit. "Captain," the medic shouted. Her trajectory carried her toward a field of drifting debris. One impact shattered part of her helmet's external shielding. Another strike sent her rotating uncontrollably. The shuttle pilot couldn't safely approach without risking collision. "She's moving too fast," someone yelled. Elias was already clipping a secondary maneuver unit onto his suit. "You won't catch her," a Marine warned. "I don't have to." Without waiting for permission, he launched himself into open space. Cold silence swallowed everything. Only his breathing filled the helmet. Soraya drifted farther with every passing second. He calculated her rotation, adjusted his thrusters, corrected again. A final burst closed the remaining distance. He caught her forearm just before she disappeared into the debris field. The impact nearly tore both of them apart. She looked at him through the cracked visor. Even dazed, recognition filled her eyes. Elias secured the emergency tether between their suits. "I'm not letting you drift away," he said calmly. She couldn't answer immediately. Instead, her gloved hand tightened around his. Together, they fired their maneuver packs toward the waiting shuttle as stars stretched endlessly around them. For the first time since meeting the human lieutenant, Captain Soraya Valor wasn't thinking about doctrine, rank, or politics. She was thinking about the steady hand refusing to let go. The shuttle's rear hatch sealed with a heavy thud. For a few seconds, no one moved. The human medic rushed to Captain Soraya, guiding her toward the medical station while emergency systems stripped away the damaged outer layers of her combat suit. Thin fractures spread across her shoulder armor, and a warning display blinked steadily beside her biosins. "Minor concussion," the medic said after a rapid scan. 2 cracked ribs. He looked at Soraya. "You were fortunate." She didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on Elias as he removed his helmet across the compartment. He looked exhausted. A bruise darkened one side of his jaw, where his own helmet had struck during the rescue. He caught her looking. "You all right?" She nodded once. "You came after me." "I wasn't about to explain to the crew why I left my captain floating through space." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. It would have been an awkward report. It would have been a terrible report. For the first time since boarding the Resolute Dawn. Neither of them noticed the difference in rank. The archive data reached the cruiser less than an hour later. The intelligence team worked continuously, decrypting file after file. When Elias and Soraya entered the briefing room, every senior officer was already present. The fleet admiral appeared by hologram from a damaged flagship. His expression was grim. "You've confirmed the authenticity." The intelligence officer nodded. Multiple encryption signatures match coalition archives. The admiral remained silent for several moments. "So the founding council concealed humanity's military evaluation?" "Yes, Admiral. They believed human adaptability would eventually surpass every founding species." "Yes." The room grew heavier with every revelation. Another document appeared. Unlike the previous files, this one contained intercepted enemy communications dating back decades. The intelligence officer enlarged the translation. "Our observers confirm the emerging species designated human continues accelerated adaptation despite technological limitations." Another page followed. "Military integration into the coalition must be prevented before projected maturity." Then another. "If humanity joins the coalition military, long-term victory probability falls below acceptable threshold." The executive officer slowly lowered his hands. "They weren't afraid of what humans are." "No," Elias said quietly. "They were afraid of what we'd become." Before anyone could respond, alarms erupted across the ship. Multiple hyperspace ruptures. The tactical display illuminated with hostile contacts. Not dozens, hundreds. Enemy vessels emerged in disciplined waves, surrounding the battered coalition fleet from every direction. The communications officer swallowed hard. "They've committed their main force." The fleet admiral's hologram flickered. "All ships prepare for defensive engagement." One officer stared at the sensor readout. They're targeting us again. Every enemy formation shifted. Their primary attack axis aligned directly with the Resolute Dawn. Soraya understood immediately. They recovered the archive beacon. They know we have the files, Elias added. The Admiral looked toward him. Lieutenant. Sir. You've studied their tactics longer than any of us. Elias nodded. They don't attack strength. They attack coordination. So what do we do? Elias stepped toward the tactical projection. We stop giving them centralized targets. He highlighted dozens of coalition ships. Every cruiser becomes an independent command node. Several officers exchanged uncertain looks. That violates every fleet doctrine. It also denies the enemy the advantage they've relied on since the first battle. The Admiral watched the simulation update. Enemy attack patterns immediately became less efficient. Remarkable. Soraya looked around the bridge. You heard the lieutenant. Her voice carried absolute confidence. Transmit the new formation. No one questioned the order. Not this time. The battle began minutes later. Coalition cruisers scattered across the battlefield, each commanding itself while maintaining flexible support ranges rather than rigid formations. The enemy hesitated. Only briefly, but long enough. Human engineering teams modified missile guidance in real time to compensate for damaged targeting arrays. Coalition interceptors began striking vulnerable flanks. Marine boarding teams launched counteroffensives instead of waiting behind defensive barriers. The battlefield transformed into hundreds of smaller engagements, exactly where human doctrine excelled. On the bridge, casualty projections began improving for the first time since the war had started. They're losing synchronization, the executive officer reported. Their commanders can't predict us anymore. Elias remained focused on the display. They'll change tactics. As though answering him, a new alert appeared. They've broken through Sector 3. A hostile strike group accelerated directly toward civilian evacuation transports. Without hesitation, Soraya issued new orders. Helm, intercept. The cruiser surged forward. Enemy fire illuminated the darkness ahead. Explosions rippled across shattered debris fields. The Resolute Dawn placed itself between the attackers and the defenseless convoy. Armor groaned beneath repeated impacts. Forward shields at 21%. We hold, Soraya said. The evacuation transports escaped behind them one by one. Several hours later, the immediate fighting subsided. Repair crews flooded damaged compartments while exhausted officers rotated off duty. Elias stepped onto the observation deck, finally alone. The stars beyond the glass looked peaceful, almost enough to make someone forget the battle. The door slid open behind him. Soraya entered quietly. Her injured shoulder remained supported beneath a medical brace. You should be resting, Elias said. So should you. Neither moved for several seconds. Finally, she stepped closer. When I first read your service file, she looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. I thought humanity had been admitted because the coalition wished to be generous. I suspected as much. I was wrong. You changed your mind after the first battle. No. A gentle smile appeared. I changed it long before then. She reached out carefully, resting her fingertips against his hand. I changed it when I realized you never fought to prove yourself. Elias looked at her quietly. You fought to protect people. Her voice softened. You saved my crew. She took another small step forward. You saved me. The distance between them disappeared naturally. Neither rushed. Neither questioned the moment. She rested her forehead lightly against his. For a long heartbeat, they simply stood together while silence surrounded them. Then she lifted her gaze. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," she said quietly. "Neither do I. But I know what today has shown me." She closed the remaining distance, kissing him gently. It was brief, tender. A promise rather than a declaration. When they finally stepped apart, the bridge alarm echoed once more throughout the ship. Duty had returned. As always. Soraya smiled, though her eyes still held the warmth of the moment they had shared. "Come on, Lieutenant," Elias smiled back. "The galaxy isn't finished testing us yet." The quiet on the observation deck lasted only a moment. The bridge alarm echoed through every corridor aboard the car. Resolute dawn. Replacing tenderness with urgency, Soraya drew a slow breath and straightened her uniform. When she looked at Elias again, the warmth remained in her eyes, but the captain had returned. "We have work to do," he nodded. "We always did." Together, they walked toward the bridge. This time, no one glanced twice at the human lieutenant standing beside the coalition captain. No one questioned why they arrived together. There were more important things demanding every officer's attention. The tactical display revealed the enemy's final maneuver. Instead of pressing scattered attacks, their entire fleet converged toward a single point in coalition space, a massive hyperspace relay that linked dozens of frontier systems. If the relay fell, reinforcements would never arrive. The fleet admiral's hologram flickered into view. "They've committed everything. They're gambling," Elias observed. The admiral nodded. "So are we." The intelligence officer enlarged the enemy formation. "They've concentrated command vessels at the center." Soraya studied the projection. "They're protecting something." Elias leaned closer. "No." He traced several attack vectors with his finger. "They're hiding someone." The bridge grew quiet. "The commander," Soraya said. "The one directing every engagement." "If we break their command network," Elias replied, "their coordination disappears." The admiral folded his arms. "You intend to strike the center. I intend to make them believe we're not." Orders spread through the coalition fleet. Instead of charging directly toward the relay, hundreds of ships advanced along seemingly disorganized vectors. From the outside, it resembled confusion. The enemy reacted exactly as Elias expected. They repositioned to intercept scattered coalition elements. Small gaps opened throughout their central formation. Tiny, brief, enough. "Now," Elias said. Soraya smiled. "Helm." The resolute dawn. Accelerated. Dozens of coalition cruisers followed, emerging from different directions at precisely the same moment. Not because they had remained in rigid formation, because every captain had received the same objective and adapted independently. Human doctrine. Shared intent. Independent execution. Enemy firing solutions faltered. Command ships struggled to redirect defenses. By the time they recognized the true attack, coalition forces were already inside the formation. Explosions illuminated the darkness. Marine boarding craft launched toward hostile command vessels. Fighters darted between streams of plasma fire. Engineers rerouted damaged systems faster than automated repair protocols could compensate. Human crews and alien crews worked side by side without hesitation. No one cared which world a soldier had been born on, only whether they could hold the line. On the bridge, reports poured in. Sector 9 secured. Enemy communications degrading. Boarding teams have reached the command carrier. Then, a transmission appeared on every screen. An unfamiliar figure stood within a dim command chamber. Its face remained hidden beneath a smooth metallic mask. Its voice carried neither anger nor panic, only cold certainty. "So, you finally understand." Soraya stepped forward. "You started this war because humanity joined the coalition. We accelerated it." The figure inclined its head. Your predecessors delayed humanity's integration for centuries. They understood the danger. Elias met the commander's gaze. They underestimated us. No. The figure answered immediately. They understood you perfectly. A tactical display appeared behind the masked commander. Thousands of simulations filled the screen. In every one, humanity survived disasters that destroyed stronger civilizations. Not through superior weapons, not through physical power, by learning, adjusting, enduring. The commander's voice remained calm. Every defeat teaches humans. Every hardship strengthens them. Every alliance expands them. We could not allow such a species unlimited time. Elias answered quietly. You already did. The transmission ended. Seconds later, enemy coordination collapsed. Without centralized command, hostile formations began acting independently. Some fought. Some retreated. Some collided while attempting conflicting maneuvers. Coalition forces pressed the advantage. The relay remained intact. One command vessel after another surrendered. Hours later, the final hostile signal disappeared from coalition space. Silence settled over the battlefield. Not the silence of fear, the silence that follows survival. Several days later, representatives from every coalition member species gathered aboard the Resolute Dawn. The same hangar where laughter had greeted humanity now held an honor formation stretching from one end of the deck to the other. The fleet admiral stepped onto the platform. For generations, he began, we believed strength belonged only to those born with extraordinary gifts. His gaze swept across the assembled officers. We were mistaken. He turned toward Elias. Lieutenant Elias Rowan, you demonstrated that courage is learned, leadership is earned, and adaptability is among the greatest strengths any civilization can possess. The admiral removed the Coalition Star of Valor from its case. It had never before been awarded to a human. He pinned it to Elias's uniform. The hangar remained perfectly still. Then, one by one, soldiers began striking armored fists against their chests. The sound echoed through the bay. Not mockery, respect. Soon, every species joined the salute. After the ceremony ended, the crowd slowly dispersed. The observation deck overlooked a peaceful stretch of stars, interrupted only by repair ships moving methodically between damaged cruisers. Soraya joined Elias at the viewport. The first time we stood here, she said, I wondered whether humanity belonged. And now, she smiled, now, I wonder how we ever imagined the coalition without you. Elias laughed softly. I wasn't alone. No? She looked out at the recovering fleet. None of us were. Beyond the glass, human engineers worked beside alien technicians. Marines from rival worlds exchanged stories over shared meals. Medical teams treated every wounded soldier without asking which flag they served. The war had changed more than borders. It had changed minds. Soraya slipped her hand into Elias's. No speeches. No audience. Just a quiet gesture beneath the stars. The galaxy will remember this battle, she said. They'll remember everyone who fought it. Elias replied. She nodded. And they'll remember the day they stopped laughing. Together, they watched the fleet begin its journey home, carrying not only the scars of war, but the beginning of something stronger, a coalition that finally understood greatness was never measured by the gifts a species was born with, but by what it chose to become when everything seemed lost.